Hello, everybody. How are you doing? Thanks for coming to seminar today. Good turnout. I came out of sabbatical for this. Man, it takes a lot to make me do that. I'm excited to introduce our seminar speaker, Dr. Don Croll. We'll tell you a little bit about his background before we let him get up here and talk. So Don received his BS in biology from UC Davis, then came here to Moss Landing Marine Labs where he did his master's. He studied the diet and distribution of the common murre in the Monterey Bay. And a lot of that work involved themes of upwelling, ensodynamics, how that affected productivity, and how that went through the food web to affect higher trophic levels. And those are themes that have continued throughout the research that he's done. Then Don went to Scripps Institution of Oceanography, where he did his PhD studying the diving and energetics of thick-billed murres and some remote islands up in Canada. He's currently a professor in ecology and evolutionary biology at UC Santa Cruz and runs the Conservation Action Lab, which works on a whole host of different interdisciplinary topics, bringing science and action together to solve conservation problems with the goal of creating real-world solutions. A lot of that work is focused on seabirds and island ecosystems. Right? He's involved in, I can't really do justice to Don's career in just a few minutes, but he created a really cool program in Monterey Bay that was called the Wind to Whales and helped lead that program for many years, which brought together a large team of experts to study the effects of upwelling on the whole ecosystem, from phytoplankton to krill all the way up to blue whales. He did a lot of really pioneering research on fisheries bycatch, which helped actually close the nearshore gillnet fishery in California. That received him the Audubon Conservation Award. Then he helped lead a big coalition of people to help ban fishing for krill in federal waters. Today he's going to be telling us about some work that he's been doing in Baja California for many years, which again includes whales, manta rays, devil rays, sea turtles, fish, mangrove estuaries, often working with fishermen and the local people using biologging and other technologies. I forget one part of your background. You were in La Paz for a while, right, at the university
2 years,
there?
yeah.
Was that a professor, lecturer?
School for Field Studies.
Yeah,
Right, yeah.
And that helped to lead to a lot of the developing the relationships and the research programs that continue to this day, which Don will talk about. He also co-founded a science-based nonprofit called Island Conservation that works globally with local communities to remove damaging invasive species from entire islands, stimulating the recovery of native plants, animals, and marine systems. So that often involves large-scale eradication of mice and rats and feral cats, and maybe there's pigs and goats and other things in there. And for many remote islands, I've been to a few of those places before. One, Palmyra Atoll in the middle of the Central Pacific, where they came in and eradicated the rats that were really damaging the seabirds. And this is a crazy operation. They come in with helicopters, they're dropping bait and trapping for a month at a time, getting rid of every single rat or mice, and then the differences are just transformative for how the whole ecosystem changes. Another island I've been to, Gough, in the middle of the South Atlantic, same thing. All the native endemic albatrosses were being killed, eaten by mice, because they just sit there on their little nests, and the little mice just eat the chicks. They don't know about predators, right? And so this really had just dramatic impacts, 20 plus islands across the whole globe. And so with that, really excited for Don to come. He's going to tell us about work that's been happening at El Pardito, a small island in Baja California. We've been taking the Baja class there. I think it's 3 different times we've taken the class there, which has stimulated some of the topics that Don will talk about today. And we're planning to go back next spring, so for people that are interested, pay attention. He might give you some ideas about types of projects and things. And Don really helps with a lot of the logistics for the class and often comes down for part of those trips. So if you come down on that class next year, you'll probably get to spend some time in the field with Don, which is really the most wonderful and magical experience. So with that, Don, get on up here.
All right. Thanks, Scott. That's super kind, mostly full of lies, but I'll take it anyhow. And what I want to do today is, first of all, I want to do is kind of go over just a little bit elaborate a little bit more on what Scott was talking about. And it kind of gives maybe a setting for how my lab works and how it's worked since I've been at Santa Cruz, which is longer than I care to admit. So our lab develops and tests conservation solutions and kind of try to move them to conservation action So kind of move from studying problems and maybe even studying solutions to actually how do you implement those, which is that's the wicked problem, is how do you move science into informing real on-the-ground conservation. And so we do that through a number of ways, but in many ways it's that relationship between our lab and the practitioners, the people that actually get stuff done. And so working with nonprofits or even starting some nonprofits along the way. Of the 39 graduate students that we've had that have come through the lab that I run jointly with Bernie Tershi, who is another Moss Landing Marine Lab alumni. Through the years, we've had 39 graduate students, and I'm happy to say, and for those of you that are wondering, what the hell am I going to do after I get my graduate degree, they're all gainfully employed in the NGO, government, academic world. So there is gainful employment, and I think that the trick is kind of moving academic research into application, and then that kind of creates a secret sauce that not only hopefully saves the world, but also gets you a job. So, and one of the things that I think that I'm pretty proud of is in our lab, Scott mentioned this, is that we've started 3 nonprofit organizations and 1 for-profit. Island Conservation, which is based, well, it used to be based in Santa Cruz, now it's just based everywhere in the world. Conservación de Islas, which is based in Mexico, in Baja California. Freshwater Life, which is a new organization we just started, which is focusing on the eradication of invasive species from freshwater systems. And if you think about the 2 most endangered groups of organisms are island species and freshwater species, especially with regards to extinction or near extinction. So we decided to kind of focus on where the problems were, and that's why we started Freshwater Life, which is a bit of a kind of arrogant thing to do when you're a marine biologist saying, I'm working on freshwater systems, but it's been fun. And finally, Conservation Metrics, which is an organization we started because what we learned is that it's also important to document outcomes of conservation action. And those documenting those outcomes both informs the adaptive management role, like are you actually accomplishing what you set out to do, but it also helps you kind of promote the idea further forward and garner support for moving the idea, scaling it, getting donor support, things like that. And so we found that was expensive to do, so we decided to start moving into how can we automate and use technology like is in our cell phone technology to move data, collect data that shows conservation outcomes. And I'm just going to say this, we were doing machine learning and AI before anyone knew what the hell it was. So we're on that cutting edge. So, but that's we've been proud of that. And some of the things that we've done that I think are particularly proud, as we protected 1,200 populations of almost 500 species and subspecies on 64 islands through the work of island conservation. Conservación de Islas has removed 60 populations of invasive species from 39 Mexican islands. We've removed invasive species now from 2 freshwater ecosystems for an organization that's 2 years old. We're doing okay, I think. And then we've generated affordable data metrics of global conservation outcomes. So we're working with a lot of organizations that are hiring conservation metrics to help them figure out what they're doing, whether they're getting the results they want. And I'll just say that working in the for-profit sector has really been interesting because it's kind of a more nimble way to work. And so I would encourage you to think about a for-profit model for things that you want to do as well as a nonprofit. We all tend to say, I'm going to start an NGO to do X, Y, or Z, but the for-profit avenue is also worth exploring. Throughout that, the organizations have been won the Mexican Presidential Conservación de la Naturaleza Award, as well as the UN World Restoration Award. So that's all stuff that our lab has done, but I'm not going to talk about that stuff today. As a matter of fact, I'm going to start off with an apology. There's nothing worse than a dusty old researcher recounting what they did in the past. It's like, those are the worst lectures in the world. And I'm going to ask you guys to endure exactly that kind of lecture. So really, and the base of my lecture is really kind of, or my talk today is about this 30-year plus relationship that I've had with a family on this island, El Pardito, which I think has been one of the most emotionally and it's just one of the most emotionally rewarding experiences I've had in my life. My family has grown up going there. My wife and I have we built our whole relationship around going to Mexico and doing this work. So it's been really, really impactful for me and my family. But it's also been, I think, not through design, but through chance, has been kind of an interesting journey in terms of how my relationship with the people of this island has evolved from, well, I'll talk about that as I go along the talk. And kind of the two themes that I want to point out here, and Moss Landing is such a great place for this theme. The first is natural history, and that's just paying attention to what the hell is going on around you. Driving down those rabbit holes, taking advantage of the opportunities that come your way. Just paying attention and getting to know not just your study organism, but the other organisms that it's interacting with, or maybe even organisms that aren't even the same ecosystem that you're studying. That natural history and just being curious will get you a long ways in this world. And that's really kind of one of the themes, major themes of what I want to talk about today, is just kind of being open to natural history. The second is kind of maybe an idea that's maybe trendy now, and I'll admit that I'm kind of using the jargon here, not because it's what we did intentionally, but it's how it ended up happening. And that is that local ecological knowledge, and basically paying attention to the people that are interacting with the environment on a day-to-day basis, the local people, the fishermen, the people that have to extract a living, and they learn as they're extracting that living, they're learning a lot about indigenous people, fishermen, farmers, whoever it is, people that actually can garner over years, generations of knowledge about how a system works. So where the hell is El Pardito? If you look at a map of Baja California Peninsula, sitting down there in the square on the left is the Bay of La Paz with a series of islands there. If you blow up the Bay of La Paz, you can see it's the Espiritu Santo, and then to the north of that, there's a couple more islands east of San Jose and east of San Francisco. And if you blow that up, you'll see that tiny rock there, which when people get the first time they get to El Pardito, Scott's witnessed it and Novato has as well, people show, what the hell are you, why are these people here? It's this tiny rock, and it really is a tiny rock. It's like less than a football field and a half in diameter. And so that's kind of where we've based our operations. And I think the interesting thing about El Pardito and answering that question is why the hell are those people there? It's kind of it started about 100 years ago. So Mexican fisherman named Juancho Cuevas and his wife Paula. It was after the Mexican Revolution, and they're kind of looking for a place where they could raise a family and do some fishing, make a living. But they were kind of dissuaded by a lot of the unrest that had happened after the Mexican Revolution. And so they started exploring those islands to the north of the town of La Paz, which was much smaller then than it is now. And what they found is some of the islands they'd get to, and it was kind of had a lot of disruption because of activities like, at that time, pearl oyster cultivation was still going on, and also mining operations. So that turmoil and kind of unsafe conditions kind of created an idea of maybe we should go somewhere else. But on top of that, and probably even more important to that, is all those islands had bugs, mosquitoes and no-see-ums that were just relentless. And so what they did is they went around and they discovered there's this one place where they could get to, which is El Pardito, which didn't have any bugs. And so Paula and Juancho established their home there. So Scott, I don't know if you've been there. I don't know if you've seen this picture before, but it's some I don't know who that guy is with the shorts, but somehow in the late 1920s, early 1930s, he visited El Pardito, and you can see how they lived back then. They had tar paper houses with roofs made out of either palm fronds or mangrove brush, roofs with sea turtle shells on top. You can see the bags where they would transport salt, and you can also see to the far right an old oil drum which they repurposed for water. And all the water and all the firewood, the fuel and water, had to come from adjacent islands. And the town of La Paz is about 30 miles away, and they had sailboats and rowing. So it was really a very different kind of scene back then. So that's where Juancho and Paula started. They raised 13 kids. And one of those kids, this kid in the photo right here, the little kid with the hat on, he was Juancho's and Paula's son. And here he is now, fast forward when I first met him. His name, so there's Juancho, and now we have Juanito. And this is Juanito and Doña Antonia. So he found his wife, Doña Antonia, in the adjacent mountains. She lived in the ranchos up there. Brought her back to the island, which I don't understand how she went along with this. But anyhow, she got on this godforsaken island. And then they went on to have 13 kids themselves. And so multiple generations now coming to the family. And so if you kind of look at kind of the history of El Pardito, kind of both the history of the people, what you can see is you've got Juancho, Juanito, Juan Pablo, and Juan. So there is a theme there. And as we went from the 1920s into the present, there's kind of the changes in how they made a living. So initially it was turtles, sharks, and rays using hook and line and harpoons. They would locally barter for supplies, and their way of getting around was by oar and sail canoe. In the 1940s, they continued with turtles, sharks, and rays using harpoons and gill nets. But what came about was post-World War II was an interest in cod liver oil, or really shark liver. And so that became an easy way for them to extract the liver from the sharks, and then they could sell that without having to ice things, because there was no ice or refrigeration. You move in the 1970s, they started to get access to refrigeration, so they continued with sharks and rays, but they started fishing more with reef fish. Also, gill nets became much more prominent, so they started using these monofilament gill nets to catch fish. And as I said, they started getting access to ice and refrigeration, so started to work with local fish markets, and they went towards using fiberglass pangas or small boats with outboard motors. And to the present, they really focus now on reef and pelagic fish. The boats have gotten bigger, the motors have gotten bigger, and so that gives them a larger range and also ability to move around much more rapidly, so they can do things like move offshore and fish for pelagic fish. They've kind of had, this family in particular has done a revival of hook and line techniques, and they're both getting access to both local and export fresh markets now. And like you said, they're still using fiberglass. So that's kind of the background. Here you can see some scenes. There's Pepe, Juanito's brother, harpooning from the bow of one of the wooden skiffs. Juanito sharpening a hook for shark fishing. Here you can see some of the sharks back with Pepe. And then also they would catch stingrays and fillet those and salt it and sell that. And as I said, they've transitioned now to hook and line, a lot of reef fish like triggerfish and groupers and snappers. And then they're starting to go more and more offshore and catch more pelagic fish like yellowtail. So that's kind of been the transition. My own history with El Pardito began, as Scott mentioned, I spent a couple of years working for Boston University for the School for Field Studies. And I was going to the island, Espiritu Santo, which is the island you can see with kind of the fingers coming out. And I was going there repeatedly, but I really wanted to access islands to the north. I was really interested in island ecology, and I was getting kind of bored of going to the same island all the time. And so I wanted to access some of those islands, like you can see scenes from on the right there. And it turns out that one of the fellows that was working for us, his name was Tito Cuevas. And he was helping with logistics for this field class I was running. And I talked to Tito, and he said, you know, I've got a family that lives on an island to the north. If you want to come visit, maybe you can take your class there. So I took him up on it, and so here's the very first class that ever went to El Pardito. I wanted to circle myself so you guys can see how little I've changed in the intervening 30-some-odd years. But this is the first class that went to El Pardito, and it really was transformative for all of us. It was very different going to an island where you're camping in the natural world, which is great, but camping with the El Pardito family, the Cuevas family, gave you access to a whole new cultural experience that I'd never had before, living with fishermen that are making a living off the island. So I really kind of fell in love with that, and so did other people. And so through the years, we've had multiple classes. I think there's on the far right, middle row, far right, that's one of the Mostaning classes. I don't know if you see any other ones. But anyhow, so through the years, we've taken hundreds of students down. Top left? Yeah. So we've taken hundreds of students down to experience the natural history around El Pardito. Like I said, it's located in kind of productive waters and really beautiful, really high biodiversity islands. And so we've done that over the years. And that's been super rewarding. And the educational side, I can't say enough about. But through the years, we've also kind of had this relationship with El Pardito around the research we've done. And I'll just be full disclosure. All this research was just a pretext to go down to El Pardito and have fun. So none of the stuff that Scott mentioned in terms of the stuff that I would tell my co-faculty at UCSC, like the real research I did, was none of this. But I've realized through the years we've kind of accumulated these experiences and these research opportunities that I think are kind of worth talking about. And so what I want to share with you today is the research that we've conducted over the last 30 years in relationship with the Cuevas family, starting with 2 stories about pelagic systems and 2 stories about coastal systems. And I want to also give a shout out to, this is definitely not my own endeavor alone. There's a lot of people that have participated in this. Jess is in there, Scott's in there, another Scott's in there. Who else have I got? And well, of course, Diana's in there. So, you know, this has been kind of a collaboration with a lot of different researchers and graduate students. And I want to give a particular shout out, because I'm going to take a lot of credit for the work of these 2 individuals. And that's Melissa Cronin on the left and Luli Martinez on the right. Graduate students of mine got their PhD working in the lab. And they really, their thesis kind of formed a lot of the core of what I'm going to be talking about today. And I also want to give another shout out to a few of these like intrepid El Parditeños, people that are silly enough to keep coming down with me year after year. Kelly Ziliakis, she was a graduate student in my lab and she's stuck around since then. She's been working for 20 years and she can do anything. Like, she also helps moss landing classes. I don't know why, she's kind of crazy, but like how do you get enough tortillas for 30 people for 2 weeks, and she can make it happen. So, and then Gage Dayton, some of you guys might know Gage. His dad is Paul Dayton, but Gage also worked here at Moss Landing for a few years as a postdoc. Of course, my beautiful wife, Diana Stellar, and then my partner in crime for 30 years, Bernie Tershi, who, as I said before, is another alum of Moss Landing Marine Lab. And I'll just say, I'm just going to give a shout out to Moss Landing. Like, the reason why there's this preponderance of Moss Landing people is, well, A, it's because that's who I hang out with. But B, they're willing to just go out there and have fun and go out and get their hands dirty and learn about the natural world. And I think that's really a hallmark of Moss Landing. I think that you can't really, it's such a special thing about this place that I don't see it at UCSC nearly to the same degree. We used to call it circular stealing when you're working on a project and you go, oh, I need this, so I'll steal it from this person and they'll steal it from you later on. And that whole idea of cooperation and collaboration, I can't encourage you graduate students enough to take advantage of that because you learn so much by doing it. So anyhow, the first story I want to tell is talking about fin and blue whales in the 1990s. And so my lab, one of the hallmarks that Scott mentioned was this idea of the window whales where oceanographic drivers create high primary production and that works its way up the food chain. And those of us that kind of work with seabirds and marine mammals at the top of the food chain, I found it was a lot easier to understand those relationships if you work in more trophically simple systems rather than having multiple links, long food chains with multiple connections. Just working in very simple systems where you've got primary production, primary consumers, and top predators. And so we've kind of focused on that with working with blue whales, manta rays, calves and sauklets, and sea turtles. So if there's any rhyme or reason why we picked those species, that's part of the rhyme and reason. So when we first started going to El Pardito, what happened was we got down there, we got some funding from the Office of Naval Research to study whale foraging. And so we convinced the Navy that we needed to do this in Mexico, which was quite a feat, I think, which I'll take some credit for doing that. But we got down to the Bay of La Paz, and we thought, well, let's work out of La Paz, but we really didn't know exactly where to work. So we started talking to the El Pardito folks, and they pointed out some great places to work. And so that was kind of the nexus of how we first started working with El Pardito folks from a research perspective. And here's kind of the early days of research. I'm really jealous of people like Ari Friedlander and others that kind of work with whales now. They have these fancy boats and great drones and things like that. But this is our small boat. And then you can see that Boston whaler, I see it's JD, is that still, does that strike a, that was a Moss Landing Boston whaler. It may still be a Moss Landing.
It doesn't look the same.
Hablapups or something, I forget what it was.
1972.
Yeah, see, so JD knows. So that was how we repurposed the Boston whaler into a whale tracking vessel. And that's Bernie Tershi and I kind of in the early days. That's how we worked down there. And that's why the beauty of working down in Mexico is you can work from small boats on large whales because the sea conditions are great. So these are the first records we ever got from a blue whale and a fin whale, the first dive recorders that anyone ever put on a large whale. And you know, we were just giddy with excitement when we first saw these things. But the thing that kind of struck us was that the whale would just repeatedly dive down, dive after dive after dive, consistently going down. And then there are these vertical excursions. So it made us kind of wonder, well, what's happening? And I think it kind of relates to the natural history of the krill, where during the day they're aggregated down deep in the water column, and then at the nighttime they disperse up near the surface to graze on phytoplankton. And so what we found is if you look at the summary of day dives to the left and nighttime dives to the right, you can see that during the day, the whales are diving down to about 100 meters over and over again. The preponderance of what dives are down to that depth. And they really don't do a lot of deeper diving at night. And then we happen to have echo sounders at the same time we were doing this work. And so what we found is that indeed the whales are going down to these dense concentrations of krill at about 100 meters. So guess what we found out? We found out that whales go where the food is. It was earth-shattering. We were so proud of ourselves, and now I just think about what the hell? It's like, really? Like lions eat antelopes, so they go, or eat gazelles, so they go where gazelles are. Well, that's earth-shattering. But that's what we found out. But we did find out a few other things too that were kind of interesting. One of the things that struck us was that for their body size, these whales were diving for much shorter durations than we would have predicted. A lot of these things scales allometrically with dive time. Your oxygen storage or body size, your oxygen storage should increase, and so you should be seeing the whales diving for much longer durations than we found. But what we found is that the fin and the blue whales that we're looking at were diving on the order of 5 to 10 to maybe 15 minutes is a long dive, which is much shorter than you would have predicted. And there's this concept of the theoretical aerobic dive limit, which is how long you can dive aerobically without having to incur an oxygen debt by building up lactic acid. And so you can calculate a theoretical aerobic dive limit based on body mass and things like that, and kind of figure out like how are these whales diving in relation to their maximum, their theoretical aerobic dive limit. So if you look at the proportion of the theoretical aerobic dive limit, so it scales from 0 to 1. If the whales were diving at their theoretical aerobic dive limit, they'd be over to the 1 side, which is what you maybe should do if you're trying to maximize the amount of time you're spending at depth. But they were diving for much shorter durations, both the blue whales and the fin whales, which shows that from a physiological standpoint, it didn't really make sense. Then you've asked the question, how long does it take for the whale to recover based on the number of lunges, which is those vertical excursions? We decided that those vertical excursions were likely lunges through krill swarms. How long did the whale take to recover? It was kind of almost an exponential function, 2 to 3 times longer if they did, depending on the number of lunges. So what we concluded from that is that lunge feeding was an energetically really costly thing to do, which Jeremy Goldbogen and Ari Friedlander are now kind of making hay on that concept in a big way, kind of trying to understand that relationship between the dynamics of the krill and the limitations of engulfment and the physiological costs of foraging. So that's kind of where we went with the whales. But as we were working with the whales, we would run into these schools of manta rays, because it turns out that manta rays are eating krill as well. And so you'd see these amazing, and these are just captivating animals. You can't be out in the ocean and say, well, oh, just another manta ray. They're just really intriguing animals. And so we would see the manta rays offshore while we were studying the whales. But also when we'd come ashore to El Pardito, every now and again the fishermen would bring ashore the manta rays that they would catch incidentally in their nets. And so they weren't targeting them, but they would catch them, and if they caught them, they would fillet them and salt the meat. So we got a few of those, the manta rays that they caught, opened them up, and their guts were just jam-packed with krill. So we thought, here's another animal that's an atrophically simple species. So we started a study looking at manta rays, which is what I want to talk about next. And it turns out that the Gulf of California is kind of a global center for manta ray diversity. There's 5 different species of the 10 species that have been identified as manta ray species. 5 of them occur in the Gulf of California, and it turns out that 4 of those species are IUCN threatened species. So and it's because, well, I'll get into that in a second. So the species we first turned our attention to were the spine-tailed devil rays, which you can see, you're studying whales, and all of a sudden these guys swim by, you kind of drop what you're doing. And so the problem with so we decided let's use that same diving technology, the technology we're using for whales, and this if we can apply it to manta rays and understand more about their foraging ecology based on what we were observing on El Pardito. So, and if you look at these animals, yeah, let's put a dive recorder on these things, but they can get to the bottom pretty fast. They don't have to come to the surface, and so it was a whole different challenge to how to get a dive recorder on one of these animals. And so we decided let's turn to people who knew what the hell they were doing, which was the El Pardito fishermen, and they solved the problem for us. And here's kind of how it's done. So that's how you catch a manta ray. And so the first thing we did was we decided to tag these animals and track them in real time. And so it was Heidi Dewar, who's one of my fellow graduate students at Scripps Institute of Oceanography some years ago. We went out with the El Pardito guys. We tagged a couple of animals with acoustic tags and tracked them in real time. And here you can see two of those tracks. And what we found is that unlike the whales that I showed you before, the manta rays stay at the surface both day and night. And and here you can see the krill schools on the right, which we were simultaneously tracking with the manta ray tracks. So basically what we found is that during the day, the manta rays really don't have access to the krill. So they're just hanging out in the surface, probably in the warmer waters, which might be some thermodynamic advantage for them for digesting their food. But what they do is they forage at night. So it turns out the whales are the day shift and the manta rays are the night shift, taking advantage of that krill. So it kind of sucks to be krill. But the other thing we found out, another startling thing, manta rays go where the food is too. So, and then you can compare what the fin whales are doing and the manta rays are doing, which is, as I said, the opposite, the day shift versus the night shift. But the spine-tailed manta rays are pan-tropical in distribution, and so we're kind of wondering more about their long-term movements and long-term patterns. And what happened in the interceding years since we first started tagging whales is that people like Dan Costa and Barbara Block got involved in developing new tagging technology. So we just rode piggyback on their technology, used the same tags that they developed, and these are called PAT tags, and we deploy them out on these spine-tailed devil rays. So we deployed them on 10 males and 3 females, so the total of 1,076 days of deployment, and a mean deployment duration of about 83 days, and the maximum of 188 days for all the animals that we tagged. And so from those data, kind of reconfirmed what we had seen in the short-term tracking, that yes, indeed, during the day and the night, they stay in the upper part of the water column. The water is less than 50 meters. And they also had temperature preferences, because these tags recorded temperature, and so their temperature preferences are about 22.5 to 27.5 degrees. But this also allowed us to track not just the vertical movements, but also the horizontal movements. And so you can see that in June, that's where we were tagging the animals around El Pardito. But by July, they started moving around the tip of the Baja California Peninsula and kind of hung out on the western side of the Baja California Peninsula into August and September. And what we think is going on is that as you move into from June into July, August, September, that warm subtropical water intrudes into the Gulf of California, reducing the productivity there, so the productivity is more focused on the other side of the peninsula. And so it turns out that Barbara Block and Schaefer from NIMS were tagging yellowfin tuna at the same time we were doing our manta ray tagging. And so here you can see the data from their tagging efforts. And for us, there was kind of a remarkable degree of overlap between the yellowfin tuna tracks and the manta ray tracks. And if you look at this, is kind of a complicated graph. Upper set of panels is a spine-tailed devil ray. The lower set of panels is a yellowfin tuna. And what you can see is in the bar graphs, you can see that the manta rays are hanging out in the upper part of the water column for all the months. And that's exactly what the yellowfin tuna are doing as well. And if you look at the line plots, you can see that the temperature preferences are about the same as well. So these animals are kind of overlapping both in terms of horizontal distribution as well as vertical distribution, and also temperature preferences. So that kind of created the potential problem that we wanted to investigate, which was the potential for bycatch in the yellowfin tuna purse seine fishery, which is one of the most lucrative and intense fisheries in the eastern tropical Pacific. And it turns out that we were concerned about that because manta rays have kind of a dangerous demography. They have large body size with slow growth. They mature late in life, and they have one pup every 1 to 2 years. So they really can't sustain too much bycatch before you start having declines in the populations. So we got access, working with Martine Hall from the Inter-American Tropical Tuna Commission, which was the governing body that regulates the Eastern Tropical Pacific tuna fishery. So I can say that the industry actually cooperated with us and gave us their bycatch data. And so Nereo Ochoa from NIMS was able to plot the distribution of the bycatch records from these manta rays. And so it was clear to us that there was a significant amount of manta ray bycatch. They're catching about 3,000 manta rays annually. their purse seine nets. And the thing about it is, these are not target species. These are kind of a pain in the butt for the purse seine fishermen. They're big animals. They're heavy to get around, and there's no market for them, so they are bycatch. So their idea is just they want to get them overboard as quickly as they can, but they're hard to manage. And so what we decided to do was, rather than just try to prohibit catching manta rays, how could we make it so that we remediate their impacts? In other words, how can we expedite them getting the animals back in the water so they survive their experience? And there's some data that I won't talk about behind here where we're tagging manta rays to see how they survived after different times being on the deck of the tuna purse seine boats. But suffice it to say, the faster you get them off the deck, the better the survivorship is. And so Melissa had this genius idea. I would just go in there and say, hey, why don't you guys do this? But what she did is she created a sweepstakes for the tuna fishing crew to say, how could you solve this problem? How could you get manta rays off the deck sooner? So she created a sweepstakes with a cash prize for who comes up with the best innovation. And so the fishermen came up with this innovation, which was a sorting grid, which there you can see the hatch in the upper left there of where the tuna gets dumped when it gets the way the tuna operation, there's a large net, and they dip with the smaller net, they dip the tuna out of the larger net and put it on board and dump it into the hold. And so that's the hold hatch cover there. And so what would happen is the manta rays would get stuck in that over the hatch cover, and so they wouldn't be it would be less efficient for them. So it also wasn't good for the manta rays because they had to get the manta rays out, and they would oftentimes use gaff hooks and things like that. So this is they came up with a sorting grid, which is kind of a large mesh thing that the tuna can pass through into the hold, but the manta rays get stuck on. And you can see how this kind of works. And here's the brailer coming on board with the manta rays and tuna in the net. And then they're dumping out the tuna, and then you can see the manta rays, and then what they'll do is they'll winch up the grid with the manta rays and then get the manta rays and take them off and put them back in the water again. So this is kind of a solution which is kind of a win-win. It's become standard practice in the Eastern Tropical Pacific, the Eastern Tropical Pacific tuna fleet. It's now moving to the Western Pacific and now into the Atlantic as kind of standard operation because they catch manta rays globally. And so it's kind of a cool solution. It's not the whole solution. There's other measures that need to be taken, but it's part of the solution. And the other thing we've been doing is working with the IUCN, the Shark Specialist Group, to create an important shark and ray area in the Bay of La Paz, recognizing the importance for all those different species of sharks. So, species of manta ray. So while we're working the manta rays, we'd be on the island, and every now and again, the fishermen would bring up a sea turtle. And because we knew them, they weren't trying to hide that they were catching sea turtles, which was kind of nice having that relationship. And in particular, they would bring Eastern Pacific hawksbill turtles, which were once thought to be extinct in the Eastern Pacific. So that was remarkable, this critically endangered sea turtle that these guys would regularly bring up. So that kind of made us start being curious about, well, what's happening with the hawksbill turtles? And in fact, in this picture I showed you earlier, on the far right, that's a hawksbill from the very beginning of when the guys were on El Pardito. So it's been part of the relationship of the people with El Pardito people with the ocean, is these turtles have been part of it. So what I want to talk about now is this coastal species, the hawksbill sea turtles. So it turns out that we were talking to the fishermen, they said, well, we oftentimes would see these sea turtles in this mangrove adjacent to the island, just a little north of the island. So that kind of set us off to try to understand maybe what role this mangrove on the south end of Isla San Jose was playing with these sea turtles. And here you can see what that mangrove looks like. It's a spectacular place. So what we did is we set out to catch sea turtles, but now you go, how do you catch a sea turtle? How do you catch a hawksbill turtle? So we turned to the El Pardito guys, and two of the methods they came up with, which was just basically using their nets that they typically use for fishing, but setting the nets in particular places and monitoring them closely so that you could extract the turtle quickly when it got caught in the net, but also using that same rodeo or strike netting approach by seeing a sea turtle and actually encircling it from the small skiff. And the last option we used was hand capturing at night. You could dive down, you can see the sea turtles kind of fall asleep, if you will, on the bottom, and so you can go down and grab them, and that's the funnest one to do. I'm not particularly good at it, but Gage Dayton is an animal at it. So here you can see with the sea turtle that we've caught, And so we wanted to do a number of things with the sea turtles. And first of all was try to understand how they use the mangrove estuary. So what we did is we kept track of our catch per unit effort of sea turtles in these 3 different habitat types: the sandy reef, which is just offshore the mangrove estuary, the mangrove estuary itself, and also a rocky reef to the south of the mangrove estuary, and asking them where was our highest CPUE as an index of importance. And so what we found is that the mangrove estuary was by far and away the most important place for these sea turtles. It's where we caught most of our turtles as we were doing our captures. And the other thing, too, that I wanted to make note of is that if you look at the size distribution of the turtles we're catching, of the 64 animals that we caught, 62 of them, or 97%, are juveniles. So that could mean one of 2 things. It could mean, one is that that's just where juveniles like to hang out, but it could also mean that hawksbill turtles don't reach adulthood until 30 years of age. And so it may take a long time for the demography of the sea turtle to catch up. So even though exploitation rates have declined in Mexico quite a bit, they're still recovering. So it may take quite a few years, decades in fact, for the population to recover. So we don't know which of those 2 things are the answer, but this is interesting that for right now we see mostly juveniles there. What we found is that the sea turtles didn't seem to go over. So when you put a dive recorder on an animal or some tracking device, usually in the marine system you go, Jesus, I had no idea that they went to China and back 5 times every year. So we started tagging these turtles with these satellite trackers, and they didn't go anywhere. And it's like the resolution of the satellite trackers, like we use for the manta rays, just didn't work. It was just too low resolution. So we had to get these fancy, super expensive satellite transmitters, which cost about 5 times more than the typical one. But they allowed us to finally track the movement because they have a GPS connection as well. It turns out that these animals, so we could use these to kind of understand their home ranges and their core areas of use. So the home ranges were they spend 95% of their time, and their core areas they spend at least 50% of their time. And so so we tagged a number of turtles. This is one turtle named Clara that was tagged for 17 days, but here you can see Luli, Pez, and Marta. And one of the things that's cool when you have your kids, I don't know if your kids ever got to name a turtle. Yeah, so our kids would name the turtles, so I'm not going to take any credit or blame for the names of these turtles. But at any rate, we found out that the home range of the turtles was about 0.05 to 17 square kilometers. It's basically nowhere. This is like for days and days and months, and the turtles don't go anywhere. And the core areas, which are even more restricted. So the first thing we learned is that they're really restricted movements patterns. And so given that we wanted to understand a little bit more about the movement patterns. So we switched to a different method, which was more cost effective, which was a acoustic transmitter that you apply to the animal, acoustic transmitter, and then you have receivers that are as an acoustic array. Fish biologists use this all the time. And as fish swims by, you probably use it all the time, don't you? So Rick, you probably use the acoustic transmitter, right, Rick? So when the animal goes by, the receiver records when the animal, who swam by and when they swam by. So using that technology, what we found is that out of 1.8 million detections of 39 turtles that we tagged, that we found that 59% of the turtles were highly resident to San Jose, where greater than 50% of the detections were in the estuary. And the proportion of detections within the tag, 95% of the turtles that we tagged stayed in the habitat where we tagged them. So if we tagged them in the mangrove estuary, that's where they stayed. We tagged them in the sandy beach area, they stayed there, et cetera, et cetera. And they moved less than 9 kilometers across 12 to 473 days. So they just really didn't go anywhere. They're really sedentary. So that kind of sparked the idea, well, what are these guys doing? Well, what's happening here? So we decided to apply GoPro cameras to these animals, and what we did is so who the hell, like, they make GoPro cameras to put on your dog, right? So there's a harness so you can put, I have dogs, I love my dog, but I'd never put a GoPro camera on it. But anyhow, so they have these harnesses. So we modified these harnesses to go on sea turtles. When GoPro got wind of it, they started giving us stuff, which was pretty cool. So the harnesses would stay on for a certain amount of time, and you see that silver thing, that's a galvanic release, so after a certain amount of time, it would corrode, and the harness would fall off the turtle. And since they didn't go anywhere, we could recover the cameras, because they had a transmitter on, acoustic pinger on them. So with that, we got these videos of what the turtles were doing. And so here you can see, looking over the shoulder of a hawksbill turtle, foraging on Callirpa. So through this direct observation, what we found is that their primary diet was algae, tunicates, and more secondarily sponges, which surprised us because the dogma at that point was that hawksbill turtles eat sponges, like that's their thing. But what we're finding is they're spending a lot more time eating algae. And this is where the heroine of the story comes in. So Diana and her crew, and I'll get into the work they were doing subtidal or scuba diving in the mangrove estuary. And they encountered these turds on the bottom. And their first thing was to say, Don, are you taking a dump off the back of the boat? But I said, no, that's not me. But so we figured out that these were actually hawksbill turtle turds. And so Diana, as we all know and love, she's got a great sense of humor. So she decided that we needed to name our paper that we published about this, Logs from the Sea of Cortez, which I apologize, where is she? I don't know where she is. I apologize to her that we didn't actually do that. But it did allow us another way of understanding the diet of the sea turtles. And what you can see is looking at both behavioral data from looking at foraging events from the GoPro cameras and the fecal matter, is that they're feeding mostly on sponges, tunicates, and algae. And algae forms a pretty important part of their diet. So we're kind of trying to understand, guess what? Do sea turtles go where the food is? And so we needed to find out more about the food distribution. So that's where Diana and the subtitle researchers from Ball Standing come in. Some of you might know Dorota Suda. She's been kind of a stalwart in this whole thing. She was part of the crew doing this. I don't know, Scott, have you ever got roped into doing this stuff? I don't know. Not yet. So what Diana and her crew did was transects both in all these different habitat types, the sandy reef, the rocky reef, and the mangrove estuary, using point contact bottom cover. Did 102 transects, 15 in the sandy reef, 20 in the mangrove estuary, and 67 in the rocky reef. And what they found is that by far and away, the highest percent cover of turtle food was in the mangrove estuary, looking at the two species of algae, Caulerpa and Halimeda, and then the sponges and the tunicates. So like I said, the turtles go where the food is. So since then, Luli's worked to identify other places off the coast of western Mexico where hawksbill turtles aggregate, and she's been working to develop a management plan for hawksbill turtles, working with the government of Mexico. And so that work's kind of ongoing. And so as we were doing all this sea turtle work, one of the things that happened was that a former student of mine, Amy Weaver, she had worked with the El Pardito fishermen when she was a student. She kind of fell in love with Mexico and La Paz. And so she moved to La Paz and became a Mexican citizen and started working for an organization called Ni Paraha, which is a nonprofit organization. And she really got focused and excited about marine protection and protecting marine resources for fishermen. And so she came up with this concept, kind of leveraging off of work that other nonprofits have done, is to develop kind of a community-based set of refugia throughout just north of the Bay of La Paz, between Loreto and La Paz. And so it turns out that she created I think they created a total of 11 different refugia throughout that whole area. They call it the corridor area, working with Ni Paraha and Conapesca, the government fishing regulatory agency. And so she established that in collaboration with the Mexican fishermen. So the fishermen are the ones who decided where the reserves were going to go. And one of the areas that they established was that mangrove estuary, because the El Pardito fishermen felt that was probably serving an important role as a nursery ground for the fish that they caught. But they also created a reserve around their island. And so that happened in 2012. And so that brings us up to the last, which has the hero of the story, is Scott Hamilton in this part of the story. So this is the coral reef habitat, kind of fringes El Pardito. And so we're interested in understanding the relationship between this marine reserve and how it affected the abundance of herbivorous fish and how that related to the coral reef abundance. So there's a dogma in coral reef ecology, and I am no coral reef ecologist, but so Scott can tell me if I'm wrong here. But coral reefs kind of can maintain in one stable state as a healthy state, where you've got a vibrant herbivore community, herbivorous fish, urchins and things like that, which can maintain the coral reefs from being overgrown by macroalgae. If you lose through overfishing, you lose the herbivores, the coral reef can transition to another stable state, which is a macroalgal state. And that can go downhill from there. So we're kind of interested in the role that the El Pardito Fishing Refuge played in kind of preventing the overfishing of herbivores in the coral reef area surrounding El Pardito. And so one of the most important groups of herbivores in the Gulf of California are parrotfish. There's 4 different species of parrotfish that surround the islands. They're sexy animals, I'm just going to say. I mean, that's a cool fish. And so, and the thing about it is that there is a market for parrotfish. You don't catch them with hook and line because the herbivores, they don't take bait. But they do get caught in gill nets, and they also get caught in spearfishing. And in particular, commercial spearfishing has been really pernicious with regards to parrotfish take. So here you can see parrotfish for sale in the Walmart in La Paz, and then also another supermarket in La Paz, Mega Supermercado. So there was a market for these parrotfish, and so they're really being taken in these areas, except for the waters around El Pardito. So we collectively, Scott Hamilton, Scott Miller, Diana, a whole bunch of us decided to start looking at this question. And this 100%, I am not going to take credit. This is Scott's idea. I'm stealing it just blatantly from him right now, because they were out there diving. I was messing around with turtles and manta rays, and they were thinking, hey, these parrotfish are pretty interesting. And so they had some student projects that got started. And so this all started from some Moss Landing Marine Lab student projects that when they came down to Mexico. So what the Scots found was that the average fish biomass of the islands that are the waters around El Pardito have much higher fish biomass compared to San Francisco, which is the island to the south, which is not protected. Just a full disclosure, some of those areas are protected, but there's zero enforcement. So there's plenty of fishing going on. So even though they're paper parks, they're not protected. So what you can see is that a lot higher biomass of herbivorous fish, and in particular, a lot of parrotfish in El Pardito compared to San Francisco. So one of the things that we did at the same time, well, more recently actually, is we decided to tag parrotfish to understand, are these parrotfish transitioning through El Pardito, or are they resident to El Pardito? So we used the same acoustic technology that I talked about that we used with the sea turtles, but this time we put them in parrotfish and had an acoustic receivers around there. And what we found, and this is just ongoing, we just put the tags out last June, so this is kind of hot off the press. We downloaded them in October. And what we found is that virtually all the parrotfish that we tagged in June stayed around El Pardito, stayed on those receivers that we had around El Pardito. And so that work that Scott Miller did was trying to understand, well, what are they eating? It turns out they're eating mostly turf algae, which is this turfy algae that grows around the coral reef habitat. And so all the 4 species tend to direct the highest proportion of their bites towards this turf algae. And so that leads to the condition, this is again Scott Miller's work, I think it's Scott Miller's work, right? Scott found that the average turf height in El Pardito was significantly lower than that of San Francisco, kind of, at least on a preliminary basis, confirming the idea that these herbivores are playing a role in maintaining the coral reef free of macroalgae. And this is super duper hot off the press. I don't even know if Diana's even seen this graph yet, but this is a point contact transects that we did in El Pardito this last June when we were down there, and it's looking like, and we still have to do a lot more work, but it's looking like the coral cover is significantly greater around El Pardito versus San Francisco. So that's kind of my story around the work at El Pardito. And what I'd like to say is that if you put this in a different context and thinking about how communities get involved in conservation research, you can think about the degree of collaboration with the researchers with the community can be none, or it can be very high. They're part and parcel, they're an integral part of the research. And also in terms of who's driving the question, the research question, it could be the PI is driving the question, or it could be the community. And so what I would argue is that when we started out, the whale work, we kind of, there wasn't a lot of community involvement with what we were doing, and we had the questions. So it was kind of on the lower left part of that graph. Through the years, what's happened is that with one project to another, we've kind of moved away from where we're driving the questions and the community is not that much involved. Is like now the questions, it's El Pardito people want to know what's happening with these refugia that we set up. and we're 100% in on helping you guys make this happen. And so is Ni Paraha, the nonprofit there. So what I would say is that, we should maybe, those of you that are kind of thinking about your field research and thinking about what you're doing, and you have the opportunity to collaborate with local communities, this is kind of a good sweet spot to sit, because A, you'll learn a lot. You'll probably make observations that you wouldn't otherwise make if you pay attention to what the people are doing. They know the system way better than you do. You're also probably safer because they actually know when you should and shouldn't go out, and they probably pay attention to whether you're coming back or not. Certainly that's what El Pardito, they always say, where are you going, when are you coming back? We're good. No, we need to know. So they're great at that. But on top of that, it's, I think, the way we want to move towards research in terms of conservation research. So, and I'll just say that I'd like to think that the El Pardito community has benefited from their relationship with us, and not in just a transactional way, but they've kind of been changing and rethinking how they're making a living on El Pardito. So Juan and Felipe Cuevas, they're the recipients of the Disney Conservation Heroes Award for their work with the refuges and the sea turtles. And the other thing they're doing is that they have become kind of like the go-to people for anyone, nonprofit or for-profit or academic institutions that are trying to do research down in the Gulf of California. There's also the movie Our Oceans, which is narrated by Barack Obama. There's a whole segment there about signal blennies. If you've seen it, it's really a cool segment. But if you watch Our Oceans, the signal blenny thing was all Juan and Felipe, telling them where to go and how to work with the signal blennies on the bottom. So they've kind of made it more of a living working on as kind of both doing research as well as conservation work. And so I think it's kind of been a great mutual trade-off. And so what I want to do is kind of just thank the El Pardito family for all their generosity with their time, their just incredible patience. I mean, could you imagine, hey, I've got 30 students and you've got an island that's about 100 meters in diameter, and I want to bring them here and live for 2 weeks. You good with that? And right on, bring it on. And it's a wonderful relationship. And so, it's really kind of been transformative for me and I think my family. And I'm not kidding when I want to say that we need to pass this relationship on to the next generation of researchers. I'm getting old. I feel like I start trying to bring the boat up on the beach. Oh no, don't hurt your back. You're gonna. So the El Pardito guys are kind of looking out for me. But I will say that I am more than happy to work with any of you, and I know Diana would be as well. If you guys want to start a project down there, I encourage you. I know that Scott and Diana are contemplating doing another El Pardito run. Just to tell you how cool Moss Island is, I have now given up taking UCSC students down there, not because the students don't like to go or the El Pardito people don't want us to come. It's the university is just such a pain in the ass. And so we're not going there anymore with our students. We're still doing research there. But a lot of this work, like especially the coral reef work that I showed you at the end, but also a lot of the sea turtle work has been really Moss Landing graduate students participating. So if you're interested, take Scott and Diana's class. But even if you're not able to take Scott and Diana's class, let us know. I think Jess has been there. She's been bitten by the bug. She's probably going to want to go down again. So, so let us know. And with that, I'll take any questions. And here's how cool my wife is. She pulled my thesis out of the library and put it on the. It can happen to you too.
Okay, I'm coming around with the microphone, not because it will project you, but it will project you to people listening online.
Oh no, Mike Foster, you cannot ask the first question. When I was a graduate student, every time Mike Foster would ask a question, it means he's going to make me squirm. All right, let me have it.
Anyway, I hate to admit it, but that was great. My question is, so you had all those juvenile turtles, and the turtles don't seem to move around very much. Is there a turtle egg-laying area there? I mean, where do the little ones come from?
Such a great question, Mike. So you saw that there was a few adults that were there. So we tagged a couple of one's named Clara, the other one's named Luli, and they're both female turtles. And so we tagged these two adult turtles. And when we first tagged them, they're adults. Wait till the breeding season, they're going to go breed, right? And so we put satellite tags on them. We've since we recaptured the sea turtles, I think, 3 times. And so the turtles have had tags on them, had tags on for like 5 or 6 years. They never went to go breed. I mean, they never went anywhere. So, because we thought they were going to reveal to us where these turtles breed. So we're starting to suspect that maybe they breed in that mangrove estuary, and they're just doing it. They're really, hawksbill turtles aren't like these big, huge egg-laying events. They're like more dispersed, and so we're thinking they're maybe actually laying the eggs in the mangrove estuary, but we don't know. But it's a great question.
Hey, Don, that was great. Thanks. Given that this is a question about your island conservation component of your work, we've been seeing more and more over the last 20 years, we'll say, situations where you have 2 endangered birds or threatened groups of animals occupying the same island, and one is out competing the other, or attacking the other's nests, or and is detrimental to the one endangered species is detrimental to another endangered species. Right. So I'm sure you've thought about this, but what do you see the future of research and conservation practices in those situations?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the idea is that we remove rats from the islands and both species benefit, but one species hammering another species as they recover. From the perspective of 2 threatened species, we're not too worried. I don't think, usually it's a competition for breeding space, for nesting habitat. And we really don't, these populations have been so depleted that that's usually not a problem with 2 threatened species. But what we do see is that there may be a threatened species in gulls in particular. And the gulls benefit, and so they hammer. And so there have been some efforts, not by us, but by others, to control gull populations while the other species recover. But it's a good question. So far, it hasn't been a huge problem. There's plenty of islands where that's not a problem, that there's a competition issue. But we have had a few issues around unanticipated consequences or unanticipated non-target issues where, for example, it's not completely unanticipated, but we're removing rats from an island in the Aleutians, and we actually took out a lot of, we didn't know the glaucous skulls would actually eat the bait, and the bait can be toxic in high doses to birds as well. So we kind of had an issue with a gull die-off, but the nice thing about that is, the good news about that is the glaucous gull populations were fine. So I'm not really directly answering your question, but we haven't had that problem that often. So.
Okay, well, just a quick follow-up on that. Philosophically, do you think it's a good idea to go in and manipulate the one species that's causing the problem, or philosophically, do you think it's better just to see what happens?
I would probably start off by seeing what happens, but there's another philosophical challenge that I've had, which I didn't think I would get into before, which is that, and this isn't what I talked about at all, but there'll be a species that's highly depleted, endangered species of bird, and it may be breeding, for example, on the main Hawaiian Islands. And those Hawaiian Islands, you'll never get the invasive species off, but you can get invasive species off some adjacent smaller islands. And so we've increasingly been getting into the idea of playing God, where we not only remove invasive species from an adjacent island, but we'll translocate the threatened seabird species over to that new island. And that works, especially because seabirds aren't really using the island directly for its resources. It's just a place to lay your eggs. And so that's really getting into high manipulation. And so, how comfortable we are with playing God. There's the idea of putting a bunch of poison on an island, but then this next level is moving birds around. New Zealand has just been doing a great job of that. And so, again, I'm not answering your question. I'm kind of dodging your question. I would let the birds sort it out initially, and then, but if it became a real problem, I would probably start interventions.
Yeah, no, you did answer the question. You did answer the question in that you think that manipulation is okay.
Well, I'm all in on manipulation because I'm killing things on islands all the time, which is what I should say is that's the story that you guys are hearing. But the story we tell our donors and our supporters is that we're restoring threatened species, not that we're killing invasive species. But that's the tool we're using, is invasive species removal.
Thanks a lot. That was a really cool talk. You mentioned starting up a couple of nonprofit NGOs as well as a for-profit venture, which was the conservation metrics. Is that right?
Yep.
I was wondering if you could share a bit of maybe some of the flavors of products that for-profit entity generates. You mentioned something about cell phone data.
Yeah, well, so when we started that, it's a good question. When we started that, it was more, we thought we were going to be modifying the technology itself, like the hardware side, and we were going to develop hardware for people to deploy on islands. But we quickly found out that really it's the data analytics side. So the products we have are data analytics, like how do you process reams and reams of video data, camera trap data. So it's how do you expedite reviewing tons of needles or tons of haystack to look for the needles, and using digital technologies to do that. And so that's been the main thing. Also, how do you manipulate large data sets so that people can upload them and you can process them. The other thing, though, that's been kind of an interesting thing that we hadn't thought about is that how do you present the data in a way that's digestible to people? And we work with an organization called Neotero, which is their philosophy is to kind of help indigenous groups protect the lands that they already have some sovereignty over. And so they're trying to tell stories about what's the effect of the work, the things that they're making the decisions of what to do. And so we're trying to understand how do we display that. For example, one of the things the groups wanted to do is understand in rainforests in Brazil when illegal logging was happening. So we have a bunch of acoustic sensors, and we've developed a whole warning system where we could tell, they can look on their phone and say there's illegal logging happening here, and we can also warn them where gold mining is happening and get there, so they can get to it sooner. So that's an area I didn't think we'd ever get into, but it's kind of what the people wanted to know, and that's the beauty of a for-profit is you kind of follow the money, and sometimes the money takes you interesting places, and so that was part of that.
All right, how about a student asking a question?
And I won't get offended if you leave because we're already like 10 minutes over, right?
Yeah, but they may have class.
Thank you. That was a great talk. I had a question about the marine protected areas around El Pardito and then the island to the south.
Mm-hmm.
Is it the family on El Pardito acting as stewards for
Yeah.
that marine protected area, and then the island to the south lacks that?
Yeah, that's such a great question because it gets to who's got the enforcement rights, and that's one of the problems in a lot of situations where the enforcement comes from the top down, and the people establish an area, but they feel helpless because there's no enforcement. And so what's happened with in this particular situation, the El Pardito guys are taking it upon themselves to enforce it. The waters around their island is pretty easy for them to do. If someone's out there, especially at nighttime when they're spearfishing that's usually when the spearfishermen are going out, they actually will go out there and shine a light on them, and so they're actually physically do it. They just do that. They don't have any special deputization from the government. And then I'll just tell you a quick story. I'm sorry, I already told you a bunch of stories, but I'll tell you another quick story that I think was just, to me, it's a hallmark of how these guys do things. So we were in the mangrove estuary, and they encountered a gill net that had been set in the estuary, which is illegally. And so if it had been me, I said, God damn these guys, and they'd pull their net up and throw it away, and that had been it. But what they did is they carefully pulled the net on board their boats. They took all the fish out of the net, put it on ice, cleaned it and put it on ice. And when the fishermen came looking for their net and they couldn't find it, they came to El Pardito. They said, here's your net, here's your fish, don't fish there again. And they haven't had that problem again. So to me, that's like kind of how their style is to kind of like think things through in a less confrontational way. And so, that's kind of the answer is they don't have the rights, and some communities are better at doing it than others. San Francisquito was, that protected area was designated by the El Pardito folks, but they just don't have the wherewithal or the resources. There's a group called Wild Aid that kind of gets into using technology to enforce MPAs, and so if you want to kind of dive down that rabbit hole, Chris Wilcox. He's here in Santa Cruz. He runs the enforcement piece. So if anyone's interested in that, I could connect you with him.
Awesome. Thank you.
Else, one more question.
Oh, Jess.
One more, and then we
I
can
don't know.
chat with Don afterwards.
Thanks, Don. That was great, and I'd love to come back. So I'm curious, the current project that you're working on with the parrotfish, if the conclusion is what you suspect, which is that the parrotfish have an important relationship for keeping the coral reef healthy, what is a perspective like conservation action that you think you might take to deal with that?
Yeah, probably nothing directly. It's more Niparaha. So we're working directly with Niparaha. They might have come to the island while you were there, but we have a pretty good relationship with this nonprofit Niparaha, which is a local NGO that set up the refugia. And so they're as anxious as the El Pardito fishermen to see how they're functioning. And the idea is that if they're functioning well, then they have to every 10 years they have to renew them. So they're up for renewal right now, so they can renew them, and B, they can do more. And they want to scale this much further beyond the corridor. So that idea, they're only postage stamps, but there are some pretty amazing places. There is a coral reef. So there's where we come and go to. It's called Portuguese. It's a shoreline. There's an amazing coral reef there, and I'm 100% convinced that it could become the next. What's that? Cabo Pulmo. It's just an amazing coral reef, but it's got zero protection, so it's just completely decimated by the fish there. But anyhow, answer your question. Niparaha would do that, not us.
Thank you.
All right, thanks everybody. Appreciate it.